Hey folks, it's Ben Greenfield, and I figured I might as well just start this podcast episode off by talking about shocking yourself. So you've probably heard me talking about e-stim before and about how it can be used for recovery. And this is literally, just like it sounds like, electric stimulation. And some electric stimulation devices are really good for things like power and strength, and others are good for recovery. The one I want to tell you about right now is for recovery. It's called a Marc Pro, M-A-R-C Pro, and it produces what is called a square waveform, which means that it grabs your muscles when it electrically stimulates them in a very therapeutic manner that increases blood flow to an area but doesn't damage muscles like a more intense form of electrical stimulation might. So this Marc Pro simply comes with these electrodes, and you surround the area that's hurting and basically shock it into submission. It doesn't hurt at all. It just delivers this mild electrical wave that does things like increase blood flow and keeps you from losing muscles when you're injured, etc. So you actually get a discount on the Marc Pro, and here's how. You go to marcpro.com, that's marcpro.com, and you use promo code BEN to get 5% off. And you can literally take this on an airplane. I've tried. TSA doesn't mind. And you can even shock yourself when you're sitting for long periods of time on a plane, in a car, you name it. I probably shouldn't say shock yourself. I should say therapeutically stimulate yourself. But either way, if you haven't yet tried out eStim or added it to your protocol, you're missing out on better living through science. So marcpro.com, that's marcpro.com, and use 5% discount code BEN. Speaking of better living through science, let's talk a bit about a new form of eating through science. Now, there is a special form of protein that has 65% bioavailable protein. That's compared to 33% in beef jerky, 23% in chicken, 22% in salmon, and just 12% in eggs. This is a complete protein source that has all the essential amino acids, has 2.2 times more iron than spinach, and doesn't destroy our planet. I'm talking about crickets. Crickets produce 100 times less greenhouse gases than cows, literally close to zero amounts of waste, have very, very low water requirements, and somebody figured out how to make a tasty bar out of cricket flour. This company is called EXO bars. They have barbecue bars, mango curry, Mediterranean, banana bread, coconut, apple cinnamon, blueberry vanilla, peanut butter and jelly, a sampler pack, which I'll tell you more about in just a second. And it's all made paleo friendly, no gluten, no grains, no soy, no dairy, you name it. And it actually tastes good. It's the protein of the future. Future. Hear that? That was an echo. I made that myself. Anyways, here is how you get some bars, and you can get a sampler pack with all their most popular flavors for less than $10 with free shipping. That's 33% off. Thank you. I did the math for you. You go to exoprotein.com/Ben. That's exoprotein.com/Ben, and that's it. That'll automatically give you your discount on these cricket bars. They're a small and nimble startup, just like a cricket, and they sell it all the time. So grab them while inventory lasts. exoprotein.com/Ben. So check all that out, the protein bars, the electrical stimulation, and now on to today's podcast episode. Oh, I almost forgot one last thing. We have a poll going. I'm thinking about switching up the podcast to being a podcast that has one long Q&A and news flashes and special announcements with me each week. And then on alternating weeks, one big, long, high-quality Q&A interview with a special guest. That would be as opposed to the 2 times per week, slightly shorter podcast that we currently put out. So basically, we're thinking about switching up to a 1 time per week podcast format with long form podcasts that really delve deep into the nitty gritty life of the person that I'm interviewing. And also that will allow more time for me to regularly put out to you the Q&A episodes with me, which seem to be quite popular and which I've done for the past 10 years now. So anyways, you can grab that poll if you just go to facebook.com/bgfitness, and at facebook.com/bgfitness, the poll in all its glory and beauty resides. Okay, now we really are going on to today's podcast. In this episode of the Ben Greenfield Fitness Show,
We can talk a lot more about the technique just because the poses are lasting longer as well. And then because the poses last longer, we're also getting nearer to that point of muscle fatigue. So you can actually build muscle and get stronger. We just really focus on the technique, and the mental benefits will come. And if you notice that you are also getting something spiritual out of it, that's great, but we just don't mention it. I don't need to mention it for it to happen. Even when we're doing postures, the emphasis is very much still on the breath and keeping your cool, so to speak.
He's an expert in human performance and nutrition. Voted America's top personal trainer and one of the globe's most influential people in health and fitness. His show provides you with everything you need to optimize physical and mental performance. He is Ben Greenfield.
Power, speed, mobility, balance. Whatever it is for you, that's the natural movement. Get out there. When you look at all the studies done, studies that have shown the greatest efficacy.
All the information you need in one place, right here, right now, on the Ben Greenfield Fitness Podcast.
Hey, what's up? It's Ben Greenfield, and I remember distinctly, it was like 2 years ago that I was at this health and yoga conference, and this guy at the conference was just like a beast, this big, huge, like 6'6" dude, basketball player, and I asked him what his training routine was, and he said, I do yoga. I'm like, all right, well, that's good for perhaps your, flexibility and your blood pressure and relaxation and breathing. But what kind of strength training program do you do? What kind of cardio program do you do? He said, I just do yoga and I play basketball. This guy was literally huge. So I remember walking away from that conversation thinking that he was probably full of it. And then I met another guy about a month later at the Paleo FX conference. And at Paleo FX conference, they had like this obstacle course set up where you'd blast through this high intensity, powerful obstacle course in 2 minutes. And I remember getting my butt kicked by about, I think it was 10, 12 seconds, something significant for a 2-minute course by this guy, this young bearded gentleman who was also ripped. And I wound up talking to him afterwards. His name was Dean Pohlman, and it turns out that he too primarily just does yoga. And so now I was incredibly intrigued. So I talked with Dean and wound up getting him on a podcast episode. You may have heard this podcast episode. It occurred about 1.5 years ago. And in that episode, we talk about how Dean uses yoga to get ripped and powerful and athletic, and that's most of what he does. And he's actually designed a special form of yoga. So what Dean has, if you listen to that podcast episode, and I'll link to it in the show notes to this episode, and you can just go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/mobility project to access the show notes for this episode. But Dean creates yoga for people that, as he puts it, want the physical benefits of yoga without the lifestyle change of becoming a hippie, pushing a giant grocery shopping cart full of kale through Whole Foods. You hold the postures a lot longer. You place more emphasis on the technique instead of the spiritual. The workouts are more catered to the physical needs of guys, although his workouts are also accessible to women. And Dean was a former collegiate lacrosse player who decided that he wanted to use yoga to become a better athlete. And so he designed this crazy yoga program that actually develops athleticism, not just say like flexibility or relaxation or serene thoughts. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about that form of yoga, but also about more about mobility, because Dean's got some pretty cool stuff he's been doing lately with different mobility techniques, and he's a very outside the box thinker, as you may already know based on my introduction. So get ready to learn more about how you can use yoga to get ripped, to get fit, and also how to increase mobility in new ways. Dean, welcome to the show, man.
Wow, that was quite the introduction.
Wasn't it?
Thanks for having me, Ben.
I practice.
That was good.
I practice. So anyways, man, the first question I have for you, though, just so folks can get to know you a little bit better, get inside your head. A lot of yogis that I talk to, I mean, people in general, but people who do yoga especially, they tend to have these elaborate morning routines. And I'm curious, are you just a guy who gets up, crushes some eggs and steak, man flow yoga style, and just jumps into the day? Or do you have a specific routine that you follow?
Well, first off, I think I'm going to disappoint you because I'm not a terribly weird yoga guy. I'm weird on my own, in my own terms, in my own regard, but not terribly weird yoga style. If I just got up and ate eggs and jumped into my routine or jumped into my day, probably be a pretty crappy day. But morning routines are something that I've worked on a lot for the last 2 years. And I actually just talked about this maybe a week ago or so. But I've tried almost everything for morning routines. I've tried cold showers and going for runs and doing intense workouts and doing regular yoga every morning, 60 minutes, and just a lot of miracle morning type stuff. I'm sure you guys have heard of some of that. And what's really stuck.
What did you say? Miracle morning?
Yeah, the miracle morning. This is more geared toward success and business people, but I figured.
What is the miracle morning?
The miracle morning, and I'm not an expert on this. I don't think I even know all the components, but it involves affirmations, visualizations, 10 minutes of intense exercise. There's a few other things, but it's nothing special in terms of a morning routine, but it's geared more towards salespeople as opposed to athletes.
Oh,
so
interesting.
Yes,
I don't want any part of that then. I don't need a morning routine for real estate agents. I want something for athletes. No, I'm just kidding.
It's nowhere near weird enough for you.
Probably just insulted everybody who does Miracle Morning. Anyways, though, so you do something Miracle Morning-esque?
Well, I've tried out all of that stuff, and some of it sticks. But my morning routine wasn't really based on this. But I've tried a lot of those aspects. But the five routines that have stuck with me, and I've got it into a nice odd but memorable number, have been things that I've done in my morning routines, in the different variation of morning routines that I've done over the last couple of years, and the ones that just kind of stick. So I like to get outside. When I wake up, I make sure that I get outside. And living in Texas, it makes it really easy because you can always go outside. It's not too cold. And I spend at least 15 minutes outside. I have a dog, so that makes it easy that I have to go outside.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Absolutely.
Yeah. First of all, I think that anybody like I used to have that I'm going to call you out actually. I used to have that mindset that you couldn't go outside in the winter or in the snow, and I started doing it. Like I started putting on boots and going outside in the snow. I'd go outside in like my boxer shorts. You'd be surprised at the amount of not just UVA and UVB radiation that can get through gray clouds. And they've actually done some research on this. Like even when the sun isn't directly hitting your skin, you get a decent amount of vitamin D exposure, and you also get a decent amount of kind of like that jump starting of your circadian rhythm, when light hits the photoreceptors in your eyes. But I think everybody should go out of their way to just be comfortable trying to step outside. Just try for like 30 days, no matter what the weather is like. Step outside no matter what it is outside, raining or snowing or sunny or whatever. The concept of getting outside in the morning, Dean, is fantastic. I think too many people don't get that burst of fresh air and sunlight and negative ions and earthing and grounding and all those benefits that you get in the morning. But I'd take it one step further and say, sun, rain, snow, just like the Postal Service, right? Just get outside.
Yeah, I mean, 200 years ago, we were living outside, right? Or we don't need to go that far back when we were living outside. You don't have to be in 68 degrees to function. So I think that we forget that a lot. Your body was made to survive in winter. We've got people living in Wisconsin right now and Washington. So
yeah. Well, some people's bodies are made to survive in winter. I guess it depends. I know there are some folks who have done the genetic testing thing and come from, say, a Southeast Asian or a Sub-Saharan African population, and they might be fighting an uphill battle when it comes to trudging outside in the snow for a morning yoga routine. But you're right. People need environmental fluctuation. So what's number 2, man?
Number 2 is solitude. So it doesn't have to necessarily be meditation. It doesn't have to be visualization or a mental process of some sort. I just have to be by myself with my own thoughts, with nobody talking to me. So I don't want to, I can spend a few minutes talking to people in the morning. But as far as functioning during the day or that morning, I need to have at least 10 to 15 minutes by myself. And I can meditate during that time. I can do visualizations. I can run through my day. I can journal, but it just has to be me by myself without someone else bugging me.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And as a parent, I can tell you right now, my best mornings are when I get up long before my kids are up. If I get up and my wife is up and my kids are up and people are already kind of like, and this sounds super selfish, but it's true. People are already like socializing and impeding on my day. And I'm even horrible at having house guests over who are up in the morning when I get up to make coffee and they're like, "Hello, Ben. How's your morning?" I am an arrogant, selfish bear in the morning. Like I'm right there with you. I need that solitude and that silence and that alone time. And a lot of times if people are already up, my kids, my wife, whatever, I will find a quiet place in the house or in the yard and just lock myself away. I'm right there with you. What's number 3?
Number 3 is I drink, well, this is out of order, but I always have water. So cold water mixed with sea salt, maybe some lime, and then whatever supplements in the morning that I'm supposed to take before I eat, right upon waking. So that's right now. That's been Siltep for a long time.
Siltep.
Yep, the natural stacks nootropic.
Yeah, that's the one with what's that? Artichoke extract in it.
Yep.
Is that right? Yeah. I forget what else that. It's not like a central nervous system stimulant. It's more of a. It's acting in, I believe, like more of an adaptogenic sense. If I'm correct, it was like one of the first smart drugs out there that's not like central nervous system based.
Yeah, I know that it's unique from others, and I think I had the talk with the guy who developed it at that conference that you and I were earlier this year. But I was hyped up on all sorts of caffeine and a lot smarter than I usually am. So it made sense at the time, and then I forgot what it meant later.
Yeah, it's artichoke extract. I've got the ingredients here in front of me. Coleus forscoli. That's an interesting one. It's I know it's good for thyroid, and it can also reduce LDL particle count to a certain extent. And apparently, when combined with artichoke, that's where you get a little bit of an enhancement of neural function. It's got vitamin B6, L-phenylalanine, and acetyl L-carnitine. I've used it before. I remember distinctly, I think it was last year, that Natural Stacks, and we'll link to this in the show notes, by the way, for those of you who want to check out Siltep. I remember you have to load with it for like 1 or 2 weeks before you begin to notice much of a change in function. Have you noticed that?
Actually, I think I noticed the benefits right away, and that could have been placebo. But I think I remember using it for the first week, and I noticed my week was a lot better afterwards. So
interesting. Okay, so we've got Siltep and a morning glass of, did you say cold or warm water?
Cold water.
Okay, cold water, good for the vagus nerve. And you've got getting outside, you've got solitude. What else? Was that 4 or was that 5?
That was, that was 3. So number 4 is movement. So, getting outside is it's really nice having a dog because I can do all of these things with no excuses. Like, well, I have to take the dog outside. I'm leaving. So, I can go outside. And what I've been doing a lot lately, and this has been really nice, but for the last couple months, I've been doing a lot of shoulder mobility and core exercises using a strap overhead. And I found that my shoulder mobility has really improved greatly from using this. And so I've been using my dog's leash as my strap. So whenever I get outside, I do just some variations of lunges, some spinal flexion and some just side stretching with a strap overhead.
And you hold that strap almost like a PVC pipe, right? Like
correct.
For mobility, like overhead stretches. Yeah, mm-hmm. I have myself. It's kind of funny. You do the dog leash. I have a wooden dowel out on my porch. And a lot of times when I'm out there doing my morning mobility, so I alternate between a little bit of yoga, and I know we'll talk about this in just a second, like your form of yoga and your form of mobility. But I'll alternate. One day I'll do yoga, and then another day I'll do this thing called the core foundation routine, which is basically a program designed by a chiropractic doc that it kind of turns on your butt and decompresses your spine. I wrote an article about it recently at Ben.
Yeah,
Fitness.
I read it.
Have you tried this before?
I've done a lot of reading. I did a lot of. I've read your article a few times, but I haven't clicked on any of the videos and looked at the movements involved yet. But it looks pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's a book called True to Form, and this guy used to work with like a bunch of Tour de France cyclists and professional athletes to teach them how to like turn on their glutes and breathe more deeply throughout the day, and then also decompress the spine, especially if like they sit a lot or they have lumbar pain. And dude, I swear by this program now. I do it almost every morning. Like you, like one of my, it's kind of interesting. We have parallels. Like I'm big time into solitude in the morning. I have a morning routine. I drink my big glass of water. I take my supplements, etc. But then I go out on the porch, and this doesn't count as my workout, right? It's just my little bit of movement for the day to gain. It's almost like if you do that 10 minutes or so of movement, you gain momentum into the rest of the day to perhaps be inspired to do your actual exercise routine or anything else. It's like, all right, I already moved for 10 minutes. Now I can move a whole bunch more. You kind of get that feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. And if the prospect of waking up and trying to do a 60-minute workout would just not be totally exciting. But after you do that 5-10 minutes of stretching, you're like, okay, now I can do something. So yeah, I get that.
And what's your fifth?
Fifth is just having a good breakfast. So I know that I'll probably get hangry within an hour or an hour and a, probably it takes about 2 hours to get hangry, but I eat within an hour and a half of waking, and I have a very consistent breakfast. It's pretty much the same every day. It's eggs, it's spinach, sauerkraut, avocado, and sweet potato a lot lately, mixed with ghee. So, and it's the same every day. It's delicious. And yeah, I'm set for at least 5 hours or 6 hours after I have a giant plate of that.
That sounds very much like what my kids have for breakfast in the morning. They get up and they do eggs and bacon and some vegetables. I'm a smoothie guy. I take out the giant Vitamix-esque. It's like I use one called an Omni blender. It's kind of like a generic version of a Vitamix, but typically I'm dumping everything from ice to prevent oxidation. I don't know if you saw, I wrote an article on this, but if you put a little bit of lemon juice and a little bit of ice in with a smoothie in which you're going to like pulverize vegetables, it keeps the vegetables from getting warm and also from oxidizing as you blend. So you get a little bit less damage to the vegetables, a little bit less heat-based damage when you're using like a high-speed blender. So you put a little bit of lemon juice and ice in first, then you dump the rest of your ingredients on top of that. So, usually for me, that's like, coconut oil and vegetables and avocado, some nut butter, some sea salt, some cinnamon. And then I just blend that all up. But the ice and the lemon juice work really, really well. I'm not a big fry up guy or an egg guy in the morning. I'm more of the smoothie variety. So
yeah, that lemon juice hack sounds pretty cool. I need to try that. I was at Costco a few months ago, and they had a ridiculous price. They had a ridiculous sale on the Vitamix, and I was like, all right, I've been looking at this thing for 3 years now. Just get it. But I need to use that thing more.
It's worth owning. I mean, you can do so many things with, like, we'll do nut butters, right? Where you blend almonds, then you strain them through a cheesecloth, and you've got almond milk coming out the bottom, and then you've got almond pulp left over that you can make almond cheese with. Or I recently wrote an article about this on bengreenfieldfitness.com where I'll take bark tea. You can get this stuff called Pau de Arco bark tea, and it's like an anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory. It's a precursor to an anti-aging molecule called nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. And you can blend the bark with fats, right? Like MCT oil, or you can blend it with like liquid fish oil or coconut oil or anything else. And it creates this. It's essentially a bioabsorbable fat soluble form of this NAD molecule. And then you can use what you've created after you strain it as like a mixer for smoothies, or you can drink it straight or whatever. It creates almost like this bark tea milk. And dude, it's kind of like up there with bone broth in terms of something that will quote unquote raise the dead So
Wow.
it's good stuff, man. You'll have to get your hands on some of this bark. I'll put a link in the show notes to the article I wrote about how to actually make this stuff.
Yeah.
Anyways,
what's your MCT oil? What do you use?
I use the form that is most efficacious for neurological function is primarily what would be called C8. So coconut oil is a mix of C8 and C10, relatively diluted with things like lauric acid, et cetera. And then MCT oil is also a blend of C8 and C10, but a little bit more concentrated. And then there's this stuff called brain octane oil. I get it from Dave Asprey's Bulletproof company, and that's just basically pure C8. And that's the stuff that really spins the dials in your brain, satiates the appetite, et cetera. So I use this stuff called brain octane or C8. But
I'm a Bulletproof ambassador. That's why I was asking, because I've tried out a few different ones, and I've got the brain octane, and I use that. I kind of alternate between that and this giant tub of refined coconut oil. I found literally a gallon of refined coconut oil. It comes in a bucket.
Nice. I like it. All right, so let's talk about your flavor of yoga, this man flow yoga. Now, I know that we did a podcast episode on it, and we talked a little bit about this, but I still need to wrap my head a little bit more around what it is that makes it so unique in terms of it building more fitness than other forms of yoga. And I was wondering if you could kind of like walk me through a sample session and give me some examples, like, in terms of the actual biomechanics or biochemistry of what's going on during a Manflow yoga session that allows it to build fitness or build tolerance to lactic acid or power or whatever else it is that you're building when you do one of these sessions. Yeah.
So when I was going to other yoga sessions, I noticed that we moved out of the postures very quickly. So if you've ever been to a vinyasa class, which is the most popular type of yoga, or you go to even a Bikram class, the poses last for, in a vinyasa class, maybe 15, 20 seconds. It's kind of one or two breaths and then, next pose. So when I was doing those classes, I was super inflexible, and I need way more time to work into the posture to actually, develop flexibility, but also to make sure I was doing everything correctly. So we make the postures last a lot longer in Manflow yoga, whereas in typical yoga, you might do 15, at most 30 seconds. We'll hold the posture for 60 or 90 seconds. So, a lot of isometric strength building.
Which is a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've tried to hold a pose like a lunge pose for 60 to 90 seconds versus 3 to 5 breaths, I mean, 60 to 90 seconds doesn't sound like long, but that's a decent amount of time to actually be holding a pose correctly.
Yeah. So that really helps with endurance. So first off, it helps with physically, it's just going to help with endurance a lot more. But number two, physically, it also helps with building flexibility, because the longer you stay in a pose, it takes anywhere from, it can take up to, what is the number I saw? I think 90 seconds. It can take up to 90 seconds for your muscles to relax and lengthen. So, while we're holding the pose for more than 15 seconds, we're actually giving your muscles a chance to open up, to lengthen, to get more flexible, for those muscles to release. So the flexibility aspect is there as well. And then number three, because we're spending more time in it, we have more of an opportunity to really delve into the technique. So we can talk about breath. All right, make sure you're using your breath to inhale to come up a little bit and exhale to go deeper. We can talk about, make sure you're externally rotating your front hip. Make sure that your arch is lifted and your ankles are externally rotated. Make sure that your chest is lifted. Make sure that you're thinking of pulling your ribs away from your hips and tightening your core. So, we can talk a lot more about technique just because the poses are lasting longer as well. And then because the poses last longer, we're also getting nearer to that point of muscle fatigue. So you can actually build muscle and get stronger.
I know in some of the studies that they've done on isometric contractions, one of the things that they've found, you talk about muscle fatigue, but I know that they've found you get a significant amount of motor unit recruitment when you drop into a position and you hold it for a long period of time, like when you get to that point where the muscle is really burning, you can actually train for increased motor unit recruitment, and that actually staves off central nervous system fatigue. So what I mean by that is, like, I'll have some of the folks who I coach for running, for example, I will begin their run and end their run with a long isometric contraction in a lunge position, right? Like a 3 to 5 minute contraction in a lunge position to grab as many motor units as possible to prime the central nervous system, or after the run is done, to fatigue the central nervous system. And I'm a huge fan of these type of isometric contractions, even thrown in during the day. I don't know if you've tried this before, Dean, but like a technique where, for example, when you're on a phone call, you just drop into a wall squat or an isometric squat and you hold it for 3 to 5 minutes. And you're actually training motor unit recruitment when you do that.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, the other thing, I learned this from Jay Schroeder. Have you heard of his extreme ISO routines?
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, this guy trains a lot of NFL athletes. And
yeah, I've heard of this.
Yeah, he'll have them go through a range of motion, but it's extremely slow, right? Like you'll do, say, like an overhead press or a push-up, and you'll take like 5 minutes to do a push-up. And one of the things that he talked about when I interviewed him, and I'll link to that interview in the show notes for this episode, just go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/mobility project. He talks about how you actually build up a lot of lactic acid in muscle tissue. And normally your muscles would shuttle that lactic acid out of the tissue up towards the liver, and the lactic acid gets converted into glucose, and then that glucose becomes an available energy source for you to use. But when you do a very, very slow contraction, you get much less of that milking action of lactic acid out of tissue. And so you build up a bunch of hydrogen ions and a bunch of acidity in muscle tissue, and you actually have to increase the density of the enzymes responsible for buffering lactic acid in tissue. So by doing a very, very slow isometric contraction, you not only increase motor unit recruitment, but also your lactic acid threshold in that particular section of tissue that you're training.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds awesome. I mean, and I'm just thinking of holding a 3 to 5 minute lunge after going for a 2 mile run or any run.
Yeah.
That sounds really difficult.
It's hard, but it can be used as a finisher or an ender to any routine, right? Like, a chest or an upper body routine. You can finish that up with an isometric push-up hold at the bottom of the push-up to failure. Or you can finish up a squat routine with an isometric squat to failure. Or you can start with that again to prime your motor unit recruitment. It's a cool technique to try if you're listening in and you're masochistic and a glutton for the burn. So Dean, you've got this yoga routine, and basically, are you going through a typical, like, hatha yoga? I know you do down dog and sun salutations, all your different lunge positions. Are you pretty much just doing that and just holding each one for 60 to 90 seconds, or are there other things thrown in?
I think there's a lot more, there's more exercises thrown in, and it's different from a typical yoga session because we've kind of modified the postures. The way that you would do let's say the bottom position of a squat in yoga isn't it's not really an athletic squat. You wouldn't be focusing on keeping a slight arch to your back and keeping your chest lifted. It's more of a stretch. So you're kind of more relaxed. Your elbows are inside your knees. So we incorporate a lot more what you would see in a body weight exercise or like a calisthenics workout. So we're not afraid to incorporate things that aren't considered yoga into the workout. So I've heard it called yoga calisthenics a lot more than I've heard it called yoga calisthenics from people who aren't familiar with it. You could also call it a slow burn yoga type class. But we also have, if we're in a gym and I have the use, I'll throw in push-ups, I'll throw in pull-ups, or just get on a bar and hang, just to make it so that we're getting in more recruitment of the muscles in the back of your body, as opposed to which yoga tends to focus on. That's
one of the things I've noticed is yoga. It's very easy to get quite quite kind of like chest and shoulder centric, where you're doing a lot of these pushes from the ground, and you almost create a muscular imbalance, so to speak, in terms of not getting a lot of those pulling type of exercises. And I don't know about you, but I've found a couple of moves that tend to help out quite a bit with that. One is whenever you're doing like a squat in yoga, or even when you're doing lunges, I will sometimes do isometric or very, very super slow rows with my upper body, where you imagine that you're holding on to like a cable or a rope apparatus and pulling it very slowly into your body. And it's just your own body weight that you're using, but you're contracting all your back and your scapular retraction muscles, either from above your head and down or out in front of you and pulling in towards your body. I feel like an idiot because I'm actually doing this in my office.
I am too.
I'm talking. Yeah. So you pull in, and everybody listening in, try it. Unless you're driving, then just use your steering wheel, which I also do. But basically, yeah, you pull, and you're essentially doing an isometric contraction for a lot of your pulling muscles, and you can do that in a lunge position or in a squat position, like isometric super slow pulls in a lunge or a squat. And then the other thing that I'll do, if I don't, like you mentioned, have access to a pull-up bar wherever I'm doing the yoga, is, especially if I'm outside, I'll use one of these kind of like TRX style suspension trainers. I've got one called a Most Fit, which is kind of like a TRX, except it's like a poor man's version of TRX. It packs a little bit better, in my opinion, as far as portability. But I'll use this Most Fit suspension strap and hang that, from a tree or a bar or whatever happens to be nearby where I'm doing my yoga. And then you can throw in like really super slow rows and pulls in with the yoga routines to address, like you mentioned, some of those muscular imbalances in terms of yoga not seeming to work the back or the upper back that much, or the scapular retractors.
Yeah. So what I'll do, I have people do goalpost arms. And kind of like you were saying before, that also helps with the scapular engagement and that scapular muscle activation. But it also helps because most people who are just starting yoga, or who don't have a flexibility practice, movement practice of any sort, they can't lift their arms straight up overhead without arching their back. So if we do goalpost arms, number one, we're actually stretching the pectorals. We're also engaging those scapular muscles, so the scapular stabilizer. So it's much more appropriate for someone who doesn't have that flexibility, and also to help balance the workout.
Yeah, that's one thing that I'll also do. And for people listening in, goalpost arms, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dean, but basically you bring your arms up as though you're like a football referee, indicating that someone just kicked a field goal. You're making the goalpost arms with the elbows at 90 degrees.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, your palms are facing behind you, and what you do is you basically squeeze your shoulders back as you make the goalpost arms, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your palms can face forward. I think it's palms forward, but yeah, right. Elbows.
Yeah, fingernails facing behind you, basically.
Correct.
Fingernails facing to your back. And one thing I've found is that this one tends to be really effective if you do an isometric contraction either against the wall as you're doing your goalpost arms, or one of the better ones to really get a good chest stretch. And this is one I was actually doing this morning, is you get onto a foam roller and you bring the foam roller up about to the level of your upper back. Then you do goalpost arms and you try to get the back of your hands to touch the floor behind you while you're in that goalpost arms position, and you just press the back of your hands as hard as you can into the floor while using the foam roller as like leverage to stretch the upper back and open up the rhomboids and the traps and the levator and a lot of those upper back muscles as you're doing goalpost arms. And if you have issues with like a shoulder hunch or a tight chest or any of those other issues that can pop up if you're doing just yoga or just push-ups or you're bench pressing a lot, this is, in my opinion, one of the best exercises to get rid of a lot of that kind of like chest tension. So cool one to add into the routine.
That is not a relaxing exercise at all. It is intense the whole way through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's like getting a sports massage. It's not like a Hands of Serenity relaxing oil massage. Like it's teeth grittingly good. The other question that I have for you regarding yoga, I actually have a few questions for you about yoga. This concept of power. I mean, obviously, and the folks who are into exercise physiology are probably trying to to jump into the podcast screaming through their headsets that we're not really developing much power or much brute strength, right? If you don't have an external load, or like a barbell or a dumbbell or a kettlebell or a stone or a keg or anything else, how are you going to develop much brute strength? And also, how do you develop power? Like you beat me on that obstacle course down at Paleo FX, jumping over walls and
proudest moment of my life.
Flipping heavy tires. Yeah. Proudest moment of your life. You haven't had kids yet, obviously, or gotten married, right?
Right.
It's just beating Ben at an obstacle course. The power, though, and the brute strength. How do you develop that? What's your response to that? Are you including like explosive exercises in a man flow yoga routine? Are you personally every once in a while getting out and deadlifting or doing heavy squats or anything like that? What's your approach for power and for brute strength?
Yeah, so I used to be all yoga. I used to be like 90% yoga and then some pull-ups to help balance. And then when I realized that yoga wasn't all that I wanted to do, that I wanted to start playing lacrosse again and start doing athletic things, that's when I started doing some other things. So yeah, I lift not often, not regularly at all, maybe on average once per week. But I get my power movements in elsewhere. Yoga is one aspect of fitness, but to say that it would cover everything would just be a lie. So I get a lot of the power in from, I do kettlebell swings, I do squat jumps, I do deadlifts, I get out and I do sprints. I live right next to a park, so I put my cleats on and I do a lot of explosive agility drills. So I get in that stuff from my other workouts, and I don't really combine the two just to kind of make a differentiation. But as far as incorporating them into yoga workouts in the future, I think that'd be a cool idea. As far as, as long as you're down in the squat, why not add in some squat jumps, or why not use some other tools and combine it? So it's definitely the ability to do it within a yoga workout is there. I just haven't done it yet.
Yeah, there's a guy, I believe it might be Dan John. I could be wrong on that. He has a kettlebell yoga program where it's an actual kettlebell yoga routine, and you're doing yoga with a kettlebell. I've experimented with that one a little bit, and I'll link to it in the show notes. I want to say it's Dan John, but I'll have to re-research it and remember. But the other thing that I've personally done, Dean, during yoga sessions, and I've done some of this man flow-esque yoga type of stuff where I'll hold these positions for a really long period of time and use some of the other strategies that we've talked about, like goalpost arms, like the use of a suspension trainer. But I will also sometimes set up my yoga mat, and I'll take one of these big kettlebells, right? Like I'll use, for example, one of the Onnit kettlebells, like the monkey ones, but the heavy ones, like the gorilla. Mm-hmm. And rather than doing, say, like light kettlebell swings or, some basic, kettlebell rows, things like that during the movement, I will do, after a series of, say, like a sun salutation series, I'll grab the kettlebell and I'll do 10 heavy swings, right? So you're getting the strength and you're getting the explosiveness, the heart rate goes up, and then you go back into the super slow yoga. The other thing I've done, like you mentioned, is you'll occasionally throw in explosive sets. So, for example, if you're doing like a lunge, a yoga routine that involves a series of lunges, you'll throw in a series of like 10 lunge jumps or 10 super explosive scissor jumps or some type of clap push-up or something power-based after you've done the slow stuff. And then what you're doing, kind of returning to what we talked about with motor unit recruitment, is you're recruiting a whole bunch of motor units with the super slow hold. And then you are training those motor units to grab as many as possible in terms of your central nervous system, grabbing as many motor units as possible, creating the power. And then if you follow that up with an isometric hold, then you're introducing a bunch of lactic acid into the tissue and creating lactate tolerance and kind of, more or less finishing off the muscle. And that gets into a strategy that I don't know if you've heard of Neuromass. Have you read this book at all, Neuromass?
No, I haven't.
Okay, there's this book called Neuromass. It's there's a guy I'm trying to get on the podcast who wrote it, but that's all his program is you do a super slow grind, and then you do a power movement, and then you finish it up with an isometric movement. And so you're getting brute strength, the isometric training, and the power all at the same time. And it actually pairs really, really well with yoga, like doing a yoga routine one day and doing something like this neuromass routine another day. So that one's another kind of cool resource if you're listening in and you want another program to try with just a kettlebell or with just body weight.
Yeah. So I was actually going to respond to that, the motor unit recruitment thing. So there are I do a lot of workouts where we focus on just priming your body. So, you want to avoid static stretching before you warm up, but there's nothing wrong with doing static postures or static isometric exercises before you warm up. So I do a lot of stuff that focuses on glute engagement and hip opening and inner thigh engagement and core engagement with yoga. So even if I'm not doing a full yoga workout, I'll use yoga exercises before I go into a weight training session or before I play a lacrosse game or something like that. And I recommend that to my clients too, and in my videos as well.
Right. And the other thing that I wanted to ask you about when it comes to your yoga practice, I guess, is this whole idea, because I know there's probably some people wondering, why do you say so much that you aren't into like the spiritual, that you place more emphasis on the technique and that you're more into like the physical benefits without the the quote lifestyle changes of being a yogi, so to speak? Like, why is that?
Yeah, so that the spiritual aspects of yoga really never made sense to me. I find that a lot of people who do yoga they weren't athletes before. They didn't have a regular fitness program. They weren't working out regularly. They started yoga as something else. And then they also started at the same time, they were also working out while they were doing yoga. But for them, the spiritual aspect has always came first. So for me, I was an athlete. The first time I did yoga, I was 22. So the first time I did yoga, I stepped into a studio as a lacrosse player. And, I'd been working out my whole life. And for me to get into the mindset that yoga was a spiritual activity, that didn't make any sense to me. It was, to draw a comparison, it would be like me doing bench press with a spiritual aspect. So it just never made sense to me. And when I started talking with other people and trying to get other people to come to yoga class with me, they're like, I don't want to do the spiritual thing. And I'm like, well, I don't either. I just ignore it and focus on the poses. So, I mean, I've since then I've transformed from I wouldn't say transformed, but I've somewhat evolved from a Neanderthal and started incorporating some spiritual practices into my life. But journaling and meditation and visualization and all those mental processes. But as far as doing yoga in conjunction with spirituality, those are just separate activities. So
isn't that though, like historically, at the risk of you like blaspheming yoga or defiling the practice of yoga, I mean, isn't that a big part of yoga historically? Is the breath work, closing your eyes and activating the pineal gland by envisioning your third eye chakra, doing like the humming and the chanting to activate the vagus nerve and to settle the central nervous system, focusing on the deep breathing so that you get not just like the oxygenation benefits, but also the parasympathetic nervous system activation. I mean, do you ever wonder if you're making yoga like too fight and flight, too sympathetic nervous system based when you are perhaps neglecting or ignoring some of the spiritual aspects of it?
I get accused of that a lot. And kind of my response to that has been, well, this is the kind of yoga that I want to do, and this is the kind of yoga that a lot of other people want to do as well. But as far as neglecting the sympathetic response system, even when we're doing postures, the emphasis is very much still on the breath and keeping your cool, so to speak. So we aren't ever doing it and saying, all right, now pant, breathe as fast as you can. So we keep that fight or flight response to a minimum as much as possible. We really do focus on on keeping things slowed down so that there is that mental stillness and there is that aspect of calmness to it, so that number one, so that you can actually hold postures longer. When you're focusing on breathing nice and slowly and keeping your body in control, the posture longer, which obviously means more endurance. But you're also going to be able to tell your muscles that they can relax and that you can build flexibility. So we don't neglect those aspects. We just take out the kind of the life advice or the spiritual advice that would you would typically encounter in a yoga class, kind of somebody saying, all right, now I want you to make the theme of today's yoga class about forgiveness, or whatever else it would say. So for me, we just really focus on the technique and those mental benefits, and the mental benefits will come. And if you notice that you are also you're also getting something spiritual out of it, that's great. But we just don't mention it. I don't need to mention it for it to happen.
Yeah, since we did our podcast together last year, I've talked to a lot of people who have done your ManFlow yoga program, both guys and girls, and they love the workout, right? Like they get an amazing workout with again, just body weight. And if you're listening in and you want to go try out any of these ManFlow yoga workouts, I'll link to some of Dean's videos. But, I personally, Dean, like I really like the spiritual aspect of it, and I can go in and have an intention for a practice, right? Like I want to focus on gratitude or forgiveness, or I want to devote this morning's yoga session or this morning's movement session to, whatever I'm feeling gratitude towards, right? Like I want to devote this towards the amazing sunshine that's on my body right now, or the wind and the air that's surrounding me, and the deep, freshness of nature that I'm immersed in. And I can get kind of woo-woo and still have an amazing workout, and I think I've found more of that since I started doing Kundalini yoga. And again, I don't want to make it sound like, there's one form of yoga that you have to do, like ManFlow yoga or kettlebell yoga or Kundalini yoga. I like to experiment with a whole bunch of different types. But since I started doing Kundalini yoga and throwing that in, right now I do it on Wednesday mornings and Sunday mornings. That has really helped me get a little bit, I guess, like get in touch better with being able to close your eyes, focus on that third eye chakra, engage in deep breathing, engage in almost like aggressive, quick, powerful movements, get the heart rate up, do some like holotropic, like Wim Hof style breath work, and kind of like roll it all into one and still get the spiritual aspect, right? Of not just like dedication and focus on the positive attributes of yoga, but for me, I'm not necessarily an Eastern, mysticist. I'm a Christian. And so, I'm focusing more on like God and prayer and what I may have read in the Bible that morning. But I've actually found that yoga is good for tapping into your spiritual side. Maybe that's just like the old wise man in me coming out, but that's my thought on spiritual stuff.
Yeah, I think that for a lot of people it's awesome, and I think that some people like even both aspects. So some people will really want, today I really want a spiritual workout, or what I get a lot of people coming into ManFlow yoga is, hey, I do a lot of yoga, but I just want to learn a little bit more about the postures, and I'm not getting enough focus on that in the typical yoga that I'm going to. So we get people we get all types of people doing ManFlow yoga, people that really like the spiritual, people that come here because they just don't like the spirituality aspect at all. And then people who are kind of in the middle, like I appreciate both. So I think it's just what kind of yoga do you want to do today?
Of course, you could have just called it yoga for meatheads. Called it good.
It might be taken.
No spirituality. You should look that up. Get that URL. No spirituality required. Just yoga, meathead yoga. Speaking of yoga, like a lot of people will do yoga for flexibility. And I think this is one of the prevailing myths out there that I think you, with some of the programs I see you developing now, you're starting to bust. But this idea of yoga making you mobile. Can you go into why it is that yoga would not necessarily be the best thing to increase mobility versus, say, flexibility?
Yeah. So, I don't need to go through the whole analogy of a rope stretching because you guys have heard that, and Ben specifically told me not to. But in terms of flexibility, in terms of mobility, flexibility is just one aspect of it. And you can stretch as much as you want, but the goal of when you're working on flexibility, your goal is to increase mobility, with flexibility just being one aspect of that. So, to really work on what your overall goal is, which is to improve your overall mobility, you need to do soft tissue work. You need to get into the fascia. You need to work on restricted muscle tissue and adhesions. So, in order to really do that, you have to incorporate some self-massage or some self-myofascial release into what you're doing. So yoga can, let's say yoga is level 1. Let's say there's flexibility to be gained from yoga, of course. But if you really want to increase overall mobility, you have to do soft tissue work. And I think that's the real, that's where the real significant dramatic increases in mobility come into play, is when you start using mobility self-myofascial release techniques. And what I like to do is I put them together. So I do, I'll work soft tissue. So at a minimum using a foam roller, but really getting into some harder mobility tools. Like I use a tool called the knot out, which is, they have peanuts, but they also have really huge peanuts, which are 4 balls across and about the size of a softball.
And what is a peanut?
So the peanut is the 2 lacrosse balls taped together, and there's a lot of
okay.
Kelly Starrett loved these. Talks about them a lot in Mobility WOD. But the one that I really like using is made by a company called the Knot Out. So KNOTOUT.
Okay, yeah. KNOTOUT, Knot Out. Oh, I've seen these. I think I actually have one of these. It's kind of like a really hard version of 2 lacrosse balls taped together, but it's in like a whole bunch of different sizes, like one for the bottom of your feet, one for your spine, etc. Exactly, yeah. And so they have one where the balls are as large as softballs. They're huge. And I use this. I don't even use a foam roller anymore. I just go straight to these things just because they're so much better at addressing restricted tissue and really pinpointing where you want to hit. And so I'll use these before a workout. And this is what I do with all of my clients and all my workout programs now too, is we'll do, a minimum of 10 minutes of soft tissue work. And then we'll go into postures and exercises that focus on lengthening, on stretching, and on engaging that muscle that we just worked into with the soft tissue work. Right. Okay. Got it. So you're starting off prior to doing something like a man flow yoga-esque routine by getting rid of muscle knots using like deep tissue work. You also mentioned self-massage. What do you mean by that?
So self-massage, there are also some techniques that I do where you're just grabbing onto restricted tissue and squeezing. That's a very brute way of explaining it, but you can also use, one thing I like to do is I like to use my ulna. So I will lather up my forearm with lotion, and then I will use that to massage my forearm. So I'll just really dig into my forearm from my elbow down to my wrist. And that's another way to do self-massage. But so self-massage, I'm normally just referring to self-myofascial release, but I can also talk about that as in just giving yourself a massage.
So you'll use your elbow, you'll hit specific spots, you use these knot out tools. What about areas that you can't get yourself? Do you work with a massage therapist at all to increase mobility to specific areas? And the reason I ask is I have had to start doing that. Maybe it's again because I'm getting old and wise. Can't get old without getting wise, right?
Just say you're getting wiser instead of
I'm
older.
Getting wiser.
That sounds better.
Anyways, though, I've found that I have had to start working with a massage therapist more because there are little spots, right? Like the back upper part of my butt that I just have a really hard time getting at, even with lacrosse balls and a foam roller and stuff like that, or like separating the soleus from the gastrocnemius down in the calf area. Mm-hmm. And so about 2 times up to 4 times a month now, I actually have a massage therapist come to my house and work on me. and we get super duper like woo woo. Like I lay on the biomat, we put the biomat on high, and then
Nice.
I put in these whole tones music frequencies now, which are like healing music frequencies that vibrate the body, and we do like essential oils, and I have a special Ayurvedic oil blend that's specifically for my Ayurvedic type, and like totally geek out on trying to get every aspect of the massage dialed in. I'm curious if you've yet tapped into the use of massage therapy much.
Man, I have not had a massage like that. I mean, you are going all out as far as making sure that your body is just a piece of putty. That's awesome. But as far as
yeah,
I
why not, right? If you're going to hire a massage therapist, I mean, and they're going to come to your house to give you a massage, you're in charge, right? So I tell my massage therapist, hey, I'm going to do the biomat, and she's totally on board with it, right? The music frequencies, this oil. A lot of times, and this is actually a tip I got from Aubrey Marcus from On It. Mm-hmm. If you use like high dose CBD, for example, prior to a massage, you do melt, like you melt into the table. If I take about 5 to 6 of the Nature CBD capsules, which are designed for relaxation at high dosage, but I almost megadose on them before a massage, and you just melt, and the massage therapist can get super duper deep into the tissue if you've got a bunch of cannabidiol in your system when you get the massage. And this is not, for those of you listening, this isn't THC. It's not the psychoactive stuff. Not that I have anything against that, but it's closer to like I guess like a Rick Simpson oil or CBD oil, but it's like CBD capsules, and you can take a bunch of that before a massage too. Anyways, though, Dean, what were you saying before I got on my bandwagon about cannabidiol?
I was going to say that, well, I do get massages, but I don't get them at home. So I don't think I could try. I think I have to drive home about 20 minutes after I get my massages. So I think if I did all of that, I would probably cause multiple
why I get them at home. Yeah, that's why I get them at home, because I get them at like 8:30 at night, right? I want to finish up my massage and just basically go to bed. Occasionally I'll do like a bath in Epsom salts or magnesium salts and then go to bed. But yeah, that's one of the reasons I get home massage. So I know as far as like the routine that you personally use for mobility, you have put it together into almost like an actual routine that's similar to your Manflow yoga. You have videos and stuff online that shows how you implement these techniques. Can you tell me a little bit more about this? What do you call it? The mobility project?
Yeah. So the mobility project is I started doing these workouts myself probably a year ago. I started really working with these self-myofascial release techniques, and I started blending them with yoga. And then I thought, well, afterwards, why don't I just do some really deep stretching so that we, really work on the flexibility and the soft tissue aspects. And then I started doing these workouts because, if people are doing Manflow yoga, they kind of want an authentic workout. So I started doing this with a small group of people that I was training online. So in a group online class. So we started doing these workouts that spent the first 20 or 30 minutes doing mobility techniques, like these self-myofascial release techniques, using a knot out, using lacrosse balls, using foam rollers. And then we would go into isometric exercises or into, yoga postures where we're targeting the muscles where we had just done the mobility work on, and then finishing off the workouts with some really deep, longer lasting stretches to just pull that tissue as much as we can and to create as much flexibility as possible. So I realized, well, we should probably put this into a workout program. So I created the mobility project, and I called it mobility project because I couldn't think of a better name, honestly, but it's a total.
It's a good name. Gets the point across.
Yeah. It's actually the most successful program we've ever had so far.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you mean the most successful?
Yeah, the most successful is in most workout programs sold.
Okay, gotcha. So people like it.
People really like it. Yeah.
And is it like a single workout that you do each day? Is it kind of like your Manflow yoga where it's a series of mobility / yoga workouts, or how does it go?
So it's a series. We've got 8 workouts in there, and it's separated by body part. So it's as much a tutorial as it is a workout. So, the first couple of times you watch it, you'll have to learn the techniques, and this is what the videos teach you. But the third time you do it, you're like, all right, I got this. So you'll understand. So it includes mobility, self-myofascial release techniques for your entire body. So we have a head and neck section. We have an upper torso section, arms. We have 2 hip sections because there's just too much going on down there to put in one workout. And then we have a lower leg section, and then also a mid or lower torso section. So there's 7 workouts that, and they all follow that technique of first going through self-myofascial release, using the mobility tools, and then yoga or body weight exercise, and then wrapping up with deep stretching. So
interesting. I'm gonna have to try it. This looks like a pretty good morning routine. It looks like you've got 20 minutes up to about 70 minutes. So you can kind of like choose your length of time.
Yeah, one of them is that upper torso one is a beast of a session. It's a long time, but afterwards your shoulders just feel, wow, it's a huge difference.
When I first got Kelly Starrett's book, Becoming a Supple Leopard, the first thing I did was I did the whole 30-day routine that he had at the back of that book to essentially just like have an entire month of deep tissue work. It looks like, for example, if I were to do this and go through each of these 7 workouts, like for 4 weeks in a row, that'd be almost like, I like to pick a month of the year, right? Like January, to do like a metal detox and a water fast and to just like work on the body, push the reboot button. I might bookmark this and actually use this for something like my January reboot the body type of routine. Because this actually looks kind of cool how you hit a certain body part or body section each week with mobility. So I'm gonna bookmark this. I'll link to this in the show notes too.
Yeah, that's kind of the intention with this, because most people who do this program they've just been spending way too much time on building strength. I mean, it's the typical guy who works out syndrome. They're like, I don't want to do flexibility. I just want to work on strength. And then they get to the point where it's like, I can't lift my arm overhead anymore. It's like, well, maybe you should have done some stretching. So this the mobility project is something that you can absolutely do intensively. So something that, I recommend, like, hey, just take the next 3 weeks off, do this every day, give your body a break. Let's work on your mobility, and then come back 3 weeks later and start incorporating these exercises into your routine and see how that feels.
Yeah. I love it, man. I love it. I'm going to bookmark this and actually try out these workouts, and I'll link to them in the show notes too. It's called the Mobility Project. Dean, I know you made a discount code for people, right?
Yes, it is Greenfield 25.
Greenfield 25. Okay, so if you go to I'll just put a link over at bengreenfieldfitness.com/mobility project, but use the code that I'll put over there too, Greenfield 25, to download. You can just download the videos to your phone or your computer or whatever.
Yep, you can do it on your phone, on your tablet, on anything.
Okay. Cool. I like it. All right. Well, I will link to that in the show notes. There's a lot more, you guys listening in, that we could talk to when it comes to yoga and mobility and taking care of your body. But alas, we are out of time. And so, first of all, Dean, I want to thank you for coming on the show today and sharing this stuff with us.
Ben, thank you for having me. It's always exciting talking to you.
Awesome. Cool. Of course it's exciting, man, especially when I've had my 8 cups of morning coffee. And then for those of you listening in, again, go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/mobility project, and I'll put a link to everything we talked about. The Mobility Project, that discount code, Dean's ManFlow yoga program, and the How to Get Ripped with Yoga podcast I did with him last year, SILTEP, the Neuromass program, my Kundalini routine, these Not Out muscle adhesion tools, so much goodness. So check all that out. And then also, if you have comments or questions for Dean or for me about anything we talked about, when you go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/mobility project, you can leave your questions, your comments, your feedback there, and either Dean or I will reply. So, Dean, I will catch you later, man.
Yeah, I'll see you later. Have a good
all right, folks.
Whatever.
All right, have a good whatever. And this is Ben Greenfield and Dean Pohlman signing out from bengreenfieldfitness.com. Have a healthy week.
You've been listening to the Ben Greenfield Fitness Podcast. Go to bengreenfieldfitness.com for even more cutting-edge fitness and performance advice.